Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit to another video. And today, we are going to be continuing What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee, My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit Part 5. As always, if you like the content on the channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Also, if you haven't already, please check out our previous uploads from earlier in the week, that including What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange, Naruto Mystic Adventures, which has now been moved from Fridays to Tuesdays, so that is what you'll be having to look forward to. And also check out Monday's upload for What If Issei Was the Shield Hero, High School DxD Dragon's Rage, Season 2, Part 2. And also stay tuned for everything else that we're going to be having on the channel, as we'll also be starting a new series, also including What If Issei Was the Ghost Rider, High School DxD Spirit of Vengeance, Season 1, Part 1, and that's going to be coming out this Friday, so stay tuned for that as well. But as always, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting that has to come out now and in the future. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Following the sports festival and some recovery, the students of Class 1A would soon return back to school, many of them noticing all the attention that they were getting from the sports festival. Especially Izuku. His fight with Todoroki was definitely the standout of the event. Many people on various trains and subways on his way to class would constantly give him praise and acknowledging of his powers and his skill. All of it was a bit much for Izuku, since he had never really been in this sort of spotlight before. Even his parents were extremely proud of him, and all the same, they didn't allow him to train while he was recovering. His father making it very clear that using the inner gates wasn't something to be taken lightly, and that rushing back into training wasn't something that he needed to do. This actually caught Inko's attention for a moment, as she kind of laughed at the idea of her husband of all people telling Izuku to take it easy, when he was the kind of person that no matter how tired or beat up he was, he would always try to get back up and train again. She even recounted one moment when, after he was very tired and a little damaged after a rescue operation, she caught him in his room trying to do pull-ups on one of the bars from the side of the door. And as such, she hit him over the head repeatedly, telling him to go back and sleep. And from that moment on, Lee learned that it was important to rest. Otherwise, you would earn the fury of your wife, and things could end up being a lot worse for you. But all the same, they were still proud of their son for how he performed. Even though he didn't win, he had shown rapid growth and improvement in just a short year. And it seemed as though he was only going to be getting better as time went on. As the students would arrive back to class, Izuku would check on Ida to see if he were doing well. The other students had heard about the attack on his brother, and how he was in the hospital at the moment. But Ida put up a strong face, telling them that there was nothing to worry about and that his older brother was going to be just fine. Although deep down, that really wasn't the case at the moment. While in their class, the students of Class 1A would be discussing the attention that they had gotten from the sports festival. As for the others, they were wondering where this was going to lead for them in terms of their heroics, as the sports festival was definitely a way to get noticed from other hero agencies. And this would be the main topic of discussion as their teacher would arrive. Mr. Aizawa telling them that the sports festival was definitely used for that purpose, as they were going to be starting a program known as the Hero Work Studies. This was going to be a way for the other pros to see what the young students were capable of, and they all got nominations based on how well they performed. Some students in the class had a lot more recommendations than others, but all the same, everyone was going to get a chance to go to a hero agency to work, and to see how things operated. Of course, there would be some restrictions, as they didn't have a pro hero license at the moment, but those would come in due time. As for now, everyone would look through their recommendations to see what they would have and where they could potentially work for in the meantime. But on top of that, there was also another thing that they needed to work towards, and that was their hero name. That was where another one of their teachers, Miss Midnight, would come into play. She was going to help them all work on their hero names, and everyone was going to try to come up with one that they thought worked for them. Some picked more fancier names, others more simple. In the case of Bakugo, all of his got rejected as they were a little too violent for a hero's taste. But then it came to Izuku. Izuku had thought about the hero name he had wanted for a while. His father was known as Hirodora, and while he respected and loved him very much, he didn't think that that was the name for him. While he wanted to be a hero like his father, he didn't want to try to take up and be exactly like him. He wanted to build something for himself, his own path, his own way of being a hero. And there was one name that stuck out. Uraraka had always told him that the name Deku could be a hero name, not an insult. And the more he thought about it, the more he kind of liked the idea. And so he decided that he would settle on the name Deku, the taijutsu hero. It would still pay homage to his father, Hirodora, the taijutsu hero, but instead he would be known as Deku. A lot of people were definitely impressed with his name, and while they didn't truly understand what Deku meant, the taijutsu hero did make a lot of sense for him, seeing as how that was what his father was in the meantime. All the while, the other teachers would be making sure and going over the students for whatever hero agency they were going to be interning for 1 week, making sure that they were all safe and up to standard. As Izuku looked through his, there was one that stuck out to him. One agency headed by a hero who seemed very interested in him. It was one of the top heroes in Japan. Her name was Mirko, the rabbit hero. Deku had always been a fan of her work and her fighting style, mainly because she used a lot of rapid kicks, similar to him in how he preferred to use kicks over punches. Of course, he could do both, but if he had to pick between the two, he preferred his kicking game a bit more, seeing that as a style that he preferred to fight with. As he was leaving, he would be called into All Might's office. He would bid Ida and Uraraka a good day as he went inside, and he would see that Shoto Todoroki was there of all people, and he looked a bit nervous. All Might would welcome Izuku and ask him to close the door, and he would do so. As he sat down next to Todoroki, All Might would then calmly explain everything. Izuku was a bit shocked in that moment, and so was Todoroki. To learn about One for All, to learn about the villain All for One, what happened to him and Izuku's father 5 years ago, and all of these things about a quirk that could be passed down over time, a stockpiling quirk. All of this felt like it was a bit too much to take in, and he didn't think that something like this could even be real. But then Todoroki had to wonder, why was he telling him this? That was when All Might would shine a proud smile towards him. He told him that after their fight at the sports festival between Shoto and Izuku, It was made very clear that only one of these two could take the power. They were the ones who he felt were the most outstanding amongst all the others that he had seen, and he truly believed that either one of them could be a great successor. Of course, he already knew that Izuku didn't want the offer, but at the same time, he felt he had to give it to him one more time, just to see if maybe he had changed his mind a little. Of course, Izuku gave it some thought after all. The chance to be All Might's successor wasn't something to just be passed up on or taken lightly. And besides, there was no telling what might hold in the future. For all Izuku knew, he might legit be the only option, and if it really came down to it, he would take the power if he had to. But really, he didn't want to. Not that he was ungrateful to All Might or anything, and he would gladly take any of his teachings along the way. But for Izuku, it just wasn't the type of power that he felt he wanted. He had much of his father within him. He wanted to show that he could be a hero even without a quirk, and the power that he had, the power he could achieve, it all came from his own natural hard work. He was able to push someone like Shoto Todoroki as far as he did without having a quirk at all. That only went on to show what he was truly capable of, and he knew that if he kept training, if he kept working hard, that he could improve. He could go farther than before, and he didn't need a quirk to prove that. All Might would understand before turning to Todoroki. The offer was his if he wanted it. Of course, if neither boy wanted the offer, then he could always still keep looking for a successor. But he truly believed in that moment that these two were definitely the best qualified, at least in his eyes. Todoroki thought it over for a moment. He thought about everything that he had gone through. His life with his father and with his mother. He wondered if doing this would really be the best thing. As a young child, he always looked up to All Might, and he wanted to be a hero just like him. And now was the chance to be his successor. There was a bit of vindictiveness in the thought also. The idea of sticking it to his old man, to become the successor for All Might, something his father always wanted, but doing it in a way that he knew his father would absolutely loathe. The very idea that his son would take a quirk from All Might, and that he would prefer to train with that rather than him? Well, then there was some added benefit to doing so also. After thinking it over, Todoroki would agree. If they were truly the only two best candidates that All Might believed were worthy, and Izuku truly believed that he could get strong enough without it, then Todoroki decided that he would take up the mantle, and he would do the best that he could. However, he did make it very clear about one thing. Even if he was going to take the power, he wanted All Might to still help and train with Izuku. He could tell that Izuku was very powerful, and he even remarked that among the top heroes, while All Might was number 1, Izuku's father was only number 2 to him. But that's when All Might would cut them off for that moment. He would tell them that, deep down inside, he didn't believe that he was actually the number 1 hero. At least, not the way that they think. He had sparred with Hiradora a few times, and he had to admit, he had taken some losses, even while going all out. The truth is, Izuku's father, Rock Lee, had an amazing power deep within him, one that could even rival One for All. However, unlike All Might, his father was a very humble person. He chose to not go all out, to not show off everything that he could do, as that really wasn't the most important thing to him. It just so happened that he was just so good at his job that he ended up taking second best. Of course, if he truly wanted it, if he truly wanted to gun for the number 1 spot a long time ago, he could have taken it. Could have taken it 10 times over, and All Might had to admit that. And that's what Todoroki had also thought. And that's why he wanted Izuku to be as strong as possible. Because he knew that even if he took this quirk, there was still the possibility that Izuku could rival him in power. And in doing so, he knew that if he were ever going to be able to match up with him, that he was going to need all the training and all the help that he could get. Izuku liked the idea of having a goal to reach towards. The idea that if he could somehow surpass Shoto, even with One For All at his side, then that could push him into a new level, a place that he had never been before, and he gladly accepted the offer. All the same, the process to give One For All to Shoto wouldn't take very long, as All Might would simply pluck a hair from his head. This would cause the two boys to feel a bit queasy and unsettling, but thankfully it didn't last too long. Of course, for Todoroki, he now needed help training and honing his quirk, or his newfound power. But how he was going to do so, he had no clue. That was when All Might would tell him of the recommendation he had of someone he wanted him to go train with. This hero was his former mentor. He was retired, but he knew how to handle someone with One For All. His name was Gran Torino. Izuku had heard of that name a few times. He had looked up Gran Torino, but there wasn't much about him. All Might then reiterating that when he retired, he really just went under the radar for a while, but he knew that he would agree to train Todoroki at least. He offered Izuku the same chance, but Izuku already had someone in mind. He would then explain that he was going to go to the Mirko agency, and All Might knew who she was, and he would even give her a call ahead of time to make everything official and to smooth things over for Izuku. Izuku was now excited for his work studies, for the chance to go train and to see what he was truly made of. He would be heading to the Mirko agency, and as for Todoroki, he was going to be heading to Gran Torino's, where he could learn to gain a mastery over One For All. When his father found out that he wasn't going to be training with him, he was absolutely livid. He started to throw a tantrum and get angry. However, Todoroki would simply tell his father that he had made his decision, that it was final. And he would go to meet with the old hero, Gran Torino. As for Izuku, with his things packed, he would be heading to the Mirko agency. Lee and Inko knew of Mirko, and they believed that she had a good agency, and that their son would get much training and benefit from being under her tutelage. And with that, they would wish their son farewell as he left for his week of hero studies. As he would arrive to the Mirko agency, it seemed to always be lively and full of energy. Everyone seemed to be bustling and moving around. As he made his way to the reception office, he would be sent directly to where her office would be on the top floor. Once he arrived, he would go inside to see that Mirko was busy running and moving around as always. She seemed to be hopping all around the room all at once, before finally landing in front of Izuku and shaking his hand. Emphatically, she would say that she was really impressed at what she saw from him during the sports festival, how he was able to fight in his martial arts. She could tell without a shadow of a doubt that he was Hiradora's kid. Izuku would calmly thank her for her praise, and she would ask him why he chose to come here. He could have gone to any other agency. She was sure that even someone like All Might would want to take him under his wing. So, why did he want to come here, of all places? Well, after Izuku would calm himself, he would explain that he really wanted to go somewhere that was a best fit for him. In the end, he was more of a hand-to-hand combat kind of fighter, and he wanted to improve in that aspect. He also would take out a multitude of notebooks, showing all the heroes that he had studied and looked after over the years. But what really impressed Mirko was just how extensive his notes were, especially the ones about her. She was very flattered, not only to see that someone was actually taking this seriously, but that someone had actually gone through all of the trouble to actually look up about her, to study her, to take note of her moves. She could even tell that by the way Izuku explained how he fought, that he actually incorporated some of her own fighting techniques, along with his father's and a few others. This was something that truly caught her eye. She would thank Izuku for being such a good student, before telling him that for the week that they had together, they were going to put him through the ringer to see what he was truly made of. And out of nowhere, she would jump into the air and try to kick his head off. Only at the last moment was Izuku able to dodge, and she would compliment him on that, stating that not many rookies actually get to dodge her kick, although she wasn't really taking it serious that time, so he shouldn't get too far ahead of himself. This was when Izuku realized that this was going to be the longest week of his life. Meanwhile, back in UA, All Might would be meeting with the police chief as they were discussing the events of the Nomu attack at the USJ. From what they were able to gather from its body, they could tell that the Nomu was artificially made, that there was at least DNA from 4 other humans mixed into its own. In a way of speaking, it was an experiment, something that had gone completely wrong, like Frankenstein's monster. And that if something like this was being manufactured and put together, then it would only be but a matter of time before the League of Villains would make their move again. If they had an army of these things, of All Might or Hiradora level capable Nomus roaming about in the streets, then there was no telling how bad things could get. All Might would assure the officer that when the time came, he and the other heroes would be ready to fight the danger. As for Izuku and Todoroki, both of their training would be very intense but in different ways. For Izuku, he studied under Mirako, learning of her fighting style, akin to that of the rabbit, to be graceful, to move freely and without thought. Her moves were very unorthodox and hard to predict, and Izuku often found himself being kicked and punched repeatedly, although the kicks were the truly dangerous being, and that was what Izuku took to learning. She would compliment Izuku on his kicking game, stating that he must have really liked Muay Thai even more than Taijutsu. But Izuku would remark that he took a little bit from all forms of martial arts, but if he had to truly explain, he liked to use his arms as a way of defending more than anything else, and he would put all of his efforts truly into his kicks. Once she heard this, she would decide that there was a certain martial arts that she wanted to teach him. It was a technique that she was especially akin to, one that was referred to as lightning kickboxing, or, as its other name is referred to, Rashuken. This was a type of fighting style that focused primarily on using one's legs as the main form of attack. The arms were formed as a way of blocking, creating the opening space, allowing for the kicks to be laid in with more striking and authority. To use this sort of fighting style, one had to be free-flowing and moving in how they fought, not being so fixated on the ground. It was only by being able to be free, to move without care, to be one with the wind. That was the way to master this technique. For Izuku, he would be given a blindfold, and he would be told to stand in place. He would stand in the middle of the room, and he would be told not to move under any circumstances. He could fight, defend, do whatever he had to do, but he couldn't move from that spot. And with that, Izuku would have to rely on his other senses. He couldn't just rely on what he thought he heard or what he thought he saw. He had to feel it, to sense it out. At first, he took a lot of kicks to the face, and to the back, and to the gut, and he keeled over many times. But eventually he got the hang of it, until he was able to block every third kick with his arms, before retaliating with his legs. Midway through the week, Izuku had gotten to the point where his reflexes had improved tenfold. His hearing was higher in Titan more than anything else, and he was adopting a lot of Miriko's traits. He had also taken to drinking carrot smoothies. Popular to belief, carrot was actually pretty good for you. Not only carrot smoothies, but they also shared in carrot cake and carrot casserole. Safe to say, while Izuku did like the dishes that she had to offer, maybe she went a little too overboard on the carrots. As for Todoroki, he was having an even harder time, trying his best to gain a mastery over One for All. He wasn't sure if he could truly get the hang of it after a while, but there was one thing that gave him the idea, and that was when he was microwaving some food. He noticed that the heat, how it worked, how it moved inward and then out, flowing all throughout the body. For Todoroki, for the training that he had done all of his life, tapping into One for All wasn't really the issue. It was making sure not to go over far and to do it. He would focus it into his hands, usually creating either large bursts of ice or large bursts of fire. Those were great for large KOing attacks, but it would leave his arms completely wrecked and extremely drained afterwards. That was when he came up with the idea. Instead of just focusing the power into one area, why not distribute it over his entire body? When he thought to do this, he was able to draw out the power in a much more eased and steady way. If he had to judge, he would say he was about at 10%, which in his case would be extremely great, as most others could only pull out maybe 1 or 2% given how quickly they had gotten the quirk. But to be able to draw out 10% of One for All right off the bat, that was truly remarkable. In the meantime, Izuku and Todoroki weren't the only ones ingrained into their work studies. Ida was also, but he had his focus on other things. He had gone to Hosu City and had gone to work with the hero known as Manimal. Although Manuel, while he was grateful to train someone like Ida from the famed Tenya family, there was one thing though that didn't make sense. Why of all the places he could have gone, why he came here? It didn't take a rocket scientist to understand his true motives. He had known about his brother's attack, and how the hero killer was rumored to be in Hosu City. While he understood where Ida was coming from, he pleaded with him to not go after the hero killer, that it would only lead to more harm than good, and that there was no need to worry, the pro-heroes would catch him in time. Ida would acknowledge this from his mentor, but at the same time, he still had his sights set on finding Stain. In the meantime, Kirigiri would bring Stain to the League of Villains hideout to meet with Shigaraki. At first, Stain wanted to see what the leader of the League of Villains was all about following his raid on UA. But after a short stint, it was quickly easy to see that, in the end, they were not fighting for the same side. Stain merely wished to kill all the false heroes, to let only the real ones prevail. But Shigaraki, he was but a spoiled child, who wanted to destroy everything in its path. And in the end, they did not agree or see eye to eye on anything. And with that, Stain would leave him. But Shigaraki, he was still enamored. He wanted to see just what it was that made him so special. Why it seemed as though people gravitated towards his message and not that of the League's. Following this, they decided that they were going to launch their next attack. They had a few high-end Nomu that they were waiting to unleash on the population, and they decided that their next attack would be at Hosu City. On one of the final few nights before the training session would be brought to an end, Izuku would be in the midst of his training with Mirko when they would get a call stating that there was an emergency in Hosu and that backup was being requested at once. Before leaving, Mirko would hand Izuku a special card. It was sort of like a temp license more than anything else. She wasn't like most other heroes who were a stickler for the rules, but she understood that things might get pretty dicey. She knew more than anyone else that Izuku was more than capable of taking care of his own, and that if worse came to worse, he could hold his own against any villain. But still, there had to be rules that were in place. That temp license basically meant that as long as he carried it, he would be protected under the Mirko agency, so he would be recognized as a pro hero during that time, so anything he did was within reason. As they set out for Hosu, Todoroki along with Gran Torino were also riding on a subway passing by, when their train car got attacked by a flying Nomu. Gran Torino would tell Todoroki to stay back, while he would jump out to fight against the flying creature. As he did so, Ida, in the midst of the chaos, would go looking for the hero killer, and after a while he would find him in an alleyway. Just as it seemed as though he were about to kill another pro hero, Ida would step in at the last moment, saving the pro hero native, as he wanted to go face to face against the killer himself. When Stain realized that it were just a child, he would warn Ida not to get involved and to leave, as he didn't feel like killing children. However, the moment Ida made it clear that he was not there to save anyone, and that he had only come for revenge, well, then Stain knew that he couldn't let him live. That now, there was just another false hero that needed to be cut down. Ida would attempt to fight against the hero killer, but he would be pinned to the ground almost instantly, with a katana ran through his shoulder, causing him immense pain, as he could feel it going numb. Stain would then lick the blood, and Tenya would be stuck in place. He would remark that he wasn't worthy of the name Ingenium, that in the end, he truly didn't see anything of him that was worthy of being a hero. As Izuku would arrive to Hosu City, he would help escort some of the civilians to safety, while Mirko would go and battle with some of the Nomu. As he was helping them, he would then remember that Ida was also in the city as well, and that his speed could be of great use at the moment. But then as he slowly started to put things together, he remembered that the hero killer was rumored to have been in Hosu City as well. And as he looked around, he would see the hero known as Manuel. However, Manuel was just as confused looking for Ida as well, and he couldn't find them anywhere. This caused Izuku to worry, because he knew fully well that if Ida wasn't with his mentor, and they were supposedly in the same city as the hero killer, then that only meant that he had gone after Stain. Once Izuku got the civilians to safety, he would jump onto the rooftops and would start running across them immediately. Channeling his chakra into his feet, he would move as swiftly and as fast as he could. His heightened sense of hearing would allow him to pick up on the faintest of details, and once he got close enough, where he felt he could hear the faint trace of Ida's voice, he would rush to the alley where he was. Just as he arrived, he would see that the hero killer was getting ready to strike him down, preparing to run his blade through his neck. However, before he could get the chance to, Izuku would yell out, "Leaf Hurricane," kicking the hero killer in the chest, sending him flying back into the alley. Ida would slowly get up to see that it was Izuku of all people. He would warn him to run, that he shouldn't be here, but Izuku would tell him that he was going to get him and Native out of here. The hero killer would turn back to see that it was Izuku. He recognized him from the sports festival, and he would warn him not to get involved, that if he did so, he would end up dying with that false hero on the ground. And Ida would also yell at him to leave as well, that this wasn't his fight, that he shouldn't be getting involved in other people's business. However, Izuku would stand proudly and would remark that getting involved even when you're not meant to, that was truly what a hero was meant to be. Stain would smile at Izuku's statement. This boy got it. He understood what it meant to be a hero. And he could tell that he was strong. Someone like him, he didn't deserve to die. At the same time, though, he couldn't afford to hold back. He would warn Izuku that he should stand down, and that he would spare him, for he was a true hero. But at the same time, the others, they were going to have to die. While Stain was speaking, Izuku would reach for his phone and would send out his location to all of his contacts. He hoped that someone would get the message and would arrive as quickly as they could. And while it seemed as though no one could understand, there was one that did, and he was flying in as quickly as he could. In the meantime, Izuku would have to hold his own against the hero killer. He decided that he would have to open up the first gate, and once he did so, he would engage in combat against the hero killer. Dodging his swords was a lot easier, thankfully, due to the training that he had had with Mirko. His dodging had improved tenfold, however, he still did get nicked at the last moment. A little bit of blood had gotten onto the tip of one of his blades, and once he licked it, Izuku would be stuck in place, unable to move. Even while trapped, this was able to help Izuku deduce one thing about Stain's quirk, that it worked primarily with licking an opponent's blood and immobilizing them, and that in all likelihood this was what had happened to Ida, and that was as to why he was still on the ground in the first place. Izuku would yell for Stain to stop, knowing that he wasn't going to be able to get up in time. However, before Stain could continue on his attack against Ida, a large wall of ice would blast straight towards him. It was the sign that someone had gotten his message, and Todoroki had arrived just in the last moment. He still was trying to get the hang of One for All, but he felt as though he were making good progress. It didn't take too long after, but Izuku would be able to get back on his feet a lot quickly. But as he looked towards, he would see that Ida was still stuck. This was now the second weakness of his quirk that he had now been able to be revealed. That his quirk had different time limits for different blood types. Izuku having a certain blood type, it made it rather short for his time limit, but Ida's was a lot longer. With that, both Izuku and Shoto would turn their attention to defeating the hero killer and protecting both Ida and Native in the alleyway, at least until other pros could arrive if they couldn't take him down first. All of this was getting to Ida. He didn't like that his friends were putting themselves in harm's way for his sake. That seemed as though they were risking their lives. He didn't want them to do that. This was supposed to be his fight, and his fight alone. He would beg and plead with them to stop, begging them to leave. He wanted to be able to do this on his own. Izuku would get cut in the leg again, and would be stopped for a brief moment. And it was thanks to only One for All that Todoroki was able to emit enough force to keep Stain back at a distance. Even though Tenya was starting to give up on himself, Shoto would tell him that now wasn't the time to do so. That if he were truly going to live up to the title of a hero, then he needed to stand. He couldn't fight on his own. That wasn't how heroes did things. If he did that, he wouldn't be any better than Stain. Instead of focusing on what he couldn't do, What he needed to do was rise above and be the hero that he knew he could be. These words of encouragement would help Ida get back on his feet once more. Remembering his brother's words and motivation, he would find the courage to fight again. Izuku, now being able to lift himself up once more, decided that he was going to have to take things to the next level. Both he and Ida would go in for the final strike if Todoroki could make an opening. They would all get into position as the hero killer would come flying straight towards them with 3 blades in hand. First, Todoroki would create a large wall of ice, knocking out the blades and shooting them high into the air, before following along himself with propelling a flame. He would continue to pelt everything he had at the hero killer, while both Izuku and Ida would shoot up against the side of the walls, preparing to deliver devastating kicks from the left and the right. Izuku would open the second gate, before jumping and performing the Leaf Hurricane on the right, while Ida would put everything he had into his Recipro Burst onto the left. The 2 kicks would connect with both of Stain's sides, causing his eyes to glaze over as he caught off blood at the last moment. Todoroki would deliver the final strike, delivering a powerful concussive blast of both heat and air together, knocking him into the ground. With the hero killer now defeated, the others would take the injured and get out of the alley as quickly as they could. It didn't take long for the other pros to arrive. Endeavor had also been called onto the scene to see what had happened, and he could see firsthand his son, along with that Izuku and that other boy Ida, and that they had the hero killer all tied up. The other pros would attempt to chastise the kids immediately, but Mirko would arrive at the last moment, telling them that there was no need to do any of that, since Izuku had a temp license. He was in his authority to do whatever he needed to do in that moment, so the kids were fine. This shocked everyone. The fact that Mirko would actually give a first-year student a temp license like that, not knowing what type of dangers he could have potentially put himself in. But all the same, they couldn't deny the results. The kids had been able to take down the hero killer, and it seemed as though everything were alright, as most of the Nomu had already been defeated, and they were being rounded up as they spoke. While they all stood there, one of the Nomu that they thought they had taken down, one of the flying Nomu, would shoot off at the last moment, attempting to grab Izuku and take him away. However, before he could get too far, the hero killer would come back to his senses at the last moment. Even while restrained, he would jump into the air, licking the blood of the Nomu that had caught Izuku, as he too did not want to see a true hero die so early. As he did so, the Nomu would come falling down into the ground. As it landed, Stain would take a spare blade from his pocket, and using it, he would kill the Nomu instantly. As the Nomu now lay dead on the ground, Izuku, getting back onto his feet at the ready, they would all turn to see that Stain was now standing menacingly. His eyes had turned blood red, and it seemed as though he were emitting an aura, a presence. There was something about him that was absolutely horrifying. Even while bandaged, while beaten and bloodied, he would look out to the crowd of heroes, and he would deliver his final warning. He would tell them that the age of fake heroes was over, and that the world would be rectified and restored back to his glory. He told them that he would take them all on. He didn't care. He would not allow himself to fall to these pretenders or wannabes. There was only one hero. Only one. No, There were two. There were only two heroes in this world in his eyes. Those heroes were All Might and Hirodora. They were the last shining examples, the last two stars in the darkened night sky. They were the only ones that he would allow to defeat and kill him. But other than that, no one would take him down. His speech left chills for everyone there. Even Endeavor had to take a step back. Gran Torino recognized all too well what was happening in this moment. Even in defeat, Stain had managed to do the unthinkable. He was leaving a calling card, something of a rallying cry, and he feared for the worst. There were many things in this world that a hero could fight. There were many things in this world that a hero could defeat. But there was one thing that remained undefeated. One concept that cannot easily be destroyed with a punch or a kick or a laser beam. And that thing was an ideology. Following the attack, Stain would fall unconscious, and he would be taken in by the authorities and be placed under arrest. As for the other students, they would be taken to the hospital and treated for their injuries. Gran Torino and Manuel would chew out Todoroki and Ida for their recklessness, although they would be thankful to Izuku for being there when he did, and as such, they were able to make what they had done legal. The police chief, someone with a humanoid body but a dog-like face, would arrive and would thank the students for their efforts. Chief Kenji, as his name entailed, would tell them that for their own safety, they were going to give the credit for the takedown of the hero killer to Endeavor. Even though technically with Izuku there they could be given the credit, they also had to think about the other students and their safety. They were still a part of UA, and if word got around that UA students were going around taking down dangerous criminals of that caliber, they could invite unnecessary attention, more so than what they already had now. They understood, and they agreed to the terms. Ida would thank both Todoroki and Izuku for helping him, and he only wished that maybe he could have made the better choice. He allowed his emotions to get in the way, and it clouded his judgment. He hoped that in the future, he could conduct himself better. As for his arm, it would take some time, but it would heal. But until then, this was the time of reflection. For all of them, it was about being better. They had legacy to live up to, each one in their own way. For Ida, it was the legacy that his brother had left behind. For Todoroki, it was taking on the next mantle of One for All. And for Izuku, it was living up to the legacy that his father had built, to pave and create his own hero way. These were the heroics that they strived to be towards. And this was their journey from here on out. As for Shigaraki and the League of Villains, everything wasn't a total loss. Even with the defeat of the Nomu, and even with Stain's rejection of the League of Villains, there had been a bit of a mix-up, if you will. You see, the public was under the assumption that Stain had actually endorsed the League of Villains, and that the two were one and the same. This pissed Shigaraki off. How on earth was someone that rejected them now getting credit? He didn't like it one bit. But at the same time, Kurogiri would tell his young ward that this could be the opportunity that they needed. A video playing of Stain's speech was now going viral all across the world. And his speech was a rallying cry. There were people out there who felt the same way. And now the League of Villains was tied into the mix. This meant that those hiding in the underworld, those seeking a change, the next wave of villains, they were searching for a purpose, a belonging. Stain was that rallying cry, and that rallying cry, unintentionally, pointed them to the League of Villains. Kurogiri would warn Shigaraki that it would be wise for them to play into this notion. This was now their chance to rebuild. And on that level, this was something that Shigaraki could begin with. As now, deep within the shadows, new villains were starting to take form. Just as the young wave of heroes were rising above, so too was the darkness. As to what side would win, that remained to be seen. But the battle lines were now starting to be drawn, as the forces of good and evil were now converging. Just as it was in the beginning. It wouldn't be long now. But before long, the Great War would be at hand. Two ideologies, one for light and one for darkness. As to who would prevail, the world would wait and see. This concludes What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee? My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit Part 5. But as always, if you enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we're going to be continuing Darling in the Franxx Lionhearted. Darling in the Franxx crossover Voltron Legendary Defender, Part 5. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.